Welcome back to Powered by Ancestry. I am Kwesi Kanadu, your host. On this episode, we'll focus on African spirituality made simple. Since spirituality is a prime ingredient in figuring out and mapping out, and therefore living your purposeful life, I figured we needed something on African spirituality made simple. And so I want to boil what we know about the practice and the ideas and actions that make African spirituality what they are in very practical and doable terms. For this episode, I have some graphics I've drawn just for you to guide you through this process. So, this chart I created for us to guide us through African spirituality made simple. Water, as we all know, is the most basic element in the universe, in the cosmos. In other words, wherever you find water, you find life. And so water is synonymous to life. Certainly, if you don't drink enough water, you'll be leaving this lifetime and meeting your ancestors. Water, of course, has different forms. And water, therefore, is an appropriate metaphor or analogy for how we can approach and use African spirituality in the work of ancestry and in other kinds of work. And so here on my chart, I have an ice cube. But also in my hand, I also have an ice cube, a real ice cube, which is cold. And so this ice cube is a solid form of water. It is dense and cold. That ice cube refers to material culture. That is, the material aspects of all cultures, which includes everything from the buildings, the artifacts, the art, the utensils, tools, essentially all the things that we human beings make, share, trade, and discard is material culture. And so the ice cube is an important metaphor or analogy for the material culture or the material aspect of life. And then also spirituality has material aspects. And so spirituality has these ritual objects and materials that are important for doing the kind of work which allows us to tap the full range of our human being. The next element or dimension of this water and its form is liquid. And here I have a glass of clear water, liquid. And this liquid form is a metaphor for ideational culture. Now, ideational is an SAT word, but don't be afraid of it. It simply means ideas or things that are cognitive, having to do with the mind. And so ideational culture refers to those things that we can see like water, but are not as solid like the material culture or the ice cube that I held in my hand a moment ago. You see, ideational culture refers to languages, thought processes, and therefore wisdom or wise sayings, proverbs. They refer to stories or storytelling or narration. And so all these had to do with ideas, therefore ideational culture. And so like the glass of water, you can see the glass of water, but it's not as solid in terms of what we can hold and manipulate as we can with a glass of water. And of course, compliments of one of my favorite martial artists, Bruce Lee, once the water is in the cup, then the water becomes the cup. That is, water assumes the shape of whatever it's in. And the same thing with ideas. And so there's ideational culture, or the liquefied form of a spirituality. Then we get to the gaseous form. And here I have a tool to help us. Can you see that? This is steam. And the steam represents the gaseous form, which is essentially spiritual culture. And like any gaseous form of the element of water, this form you cannot touch like the solid cube. You cannot really see clearly like the water. It does not hold a shape like water does. That is, water becomes the shape of anything that it's in. Spiritual culture is more immaterial. You can't get a hold or handle on it. Spiritual culture is the other sense beyond our five senses. So spiritual culture, we cannot taste it, we cannot touch it, we cannot hear it, we cannot see it, but we can experience it. And I place spiritual culture as an analogy to stress. Stress is something that we all experience. You cannot see, taste, touch, hear, or apprehend through our five basic senses. However, we know stress is real because we experience it. And that's what spirituality is. We know it's real because we experience it. Have you ever thought, for example, about someone and then they call you on the phone? That's spirituality. That is, there's a certain energy that animates our universe, that animates our lives. And when we are in tune with that energy, these things that happen beyond the comprehension of our five senses magically or not so magically appear. These three stages or forms of water is African spirituality, meaning all these phases can be compared to a tree. So the tree is the physical manifestation or expression of this elemental form of water, or in our case, African spirituality. The roots of that tree is the ideational culture, the liquid portion, meaning you can see some of it sticking out from the base of the tree, but for the most part, it's tucked under the soil. And the soil are the unseen but known portions of the soil which feeds the roots, which of course makes the tree possible. African spirituality is simply water that takes on different form. Takes on material form, liquid form, gaseous form. And all of it together is spirituality. Indeed, in this gaseous form, spirituality is as simple as us breathing. In fact, breathing is a spiritual act. Because if you're not breathing, you're not here with us. The animating force in us, the life force in us, is this gaseous form, is that breath. But that animating force, of course, is connected to roots and, of course, to the tree that is us. If you think about spirituality, you're thinking about the whole human being. We have solid forms, our physical bodies, blood matter, blood plasma. We have ideational forms, our mind. And we want to make clear the mind is not the same as the brain. The brain is the physical, right, the solid organ. The mind is effectively the ideational portion. So when you think about the distinction between the brain and the mind, think about a projector, a physical device, and what it projects on the screen. What it projects on the screen is the mind, right? Is the immaterial, ideational portion. And of course, the gaseous part, the things that we don't see, or what we might call the seen unseen. We know it's there because it's real, because we experience it, but it's hard to really apprehend by the common five senses. A great way to think about African spirituality is think of it as simply water that takes on different forms. Ritual objects, words, ideas, and of course, the spiritual forces of nature that animate the natural world and of course our lives. Now, many people have a hard time distinguishing religion from spirituality, or even ask, is there a distinction or should there be a distinction? I think there should be a distinction because they're not the same. I want you to think about spirituality and religion in this way. I'll come back to my glass of water. Now, I don't have another glass that has gin or a clear liquor inside of it, but just imagine that there was another glass filled with gin, same size, same height of liquid. Sitting a few feet away from both glasses, can you tell the difference between the two? You probably can't. There's no way to know. And that's an analogy for spirituality and religion. That from a distance, and even somewhat up close, they look the same. But of course, water preserves life, sustains life. The gin ends life. You drink enough of it, you're going to meet your ancestor, right? One nourishes, cleanses, the other gets you drunk and gets you to the grave. And so religion is like the gin. Religion is formalized dogma. Dogma is simply a set of beliefs. And those beliefs, they are fixed. Those beliefs, they also create an us versus them. You are part of a community, but you're also excluded if you're not part of that community. And so that main feature of religion makes it like the gin, that it is clear like the water, it looks like the water, but it behaves quite differently, has a whole different outcome for the water. And of course, being dogmatic makes you believe rather than think that your religion is the only religion and is the best religion that there is, which of course has its own problems. In contrast, spirituality, like the water, is a sense of the cosmos and a sense of the sacred that doesn't require believing in a book and doesn't require an intermediary, that is, a pastor or a preacher or a clergyman. In other words, it doesn't require intermediary. It is your direct connection by virtue of breathing with the creative force of the universe. You have a direct line, a direct cell phone line to this creative force without any intermediary in terms of literature or books, scriptures, or middlemen. And so spirituality indeed frees you or liberates you from the imprisonment that religion offers. And that's why we have to distinguish the two. They may look similar and even appear similar, but they're quite different. I want to share with you at the bottom of this whiteboard some of the common features of African spirituality that they all share, both in Africa on its outlying islands, as well as in the African diaspora. They all feature or have a place for ancestors. This is important because you will never meet Jesus, but you have heard, if not have met, your grandparents. You may never meet and will never meet Muhammad, but you will and have met your grandfather or your great-grandfather or grandmother. These are people that you have a direct connection with rather than some figures that may or may not have existed in the way that we are led to believe. The second feature among these African spiritualities are nature and certainly the spiritual forces that are located in nature. And so no, African and people of African ancestry do not believe in rocks or hills or stones, but they do hold, like other indigenous peoples in the world, that those material things all have a what? Animating force, a gaseous or invisible or unseen animating force that makes them move. And so in other words, we all know a river is a physical, solid, and concrete part of reality, but what makes the river move on its own? It has an animating force. And so the Africans appreciate that the river has an animating spiritual force, and they're able to use that force for healing, for other kinds of social and community and family work. The other feature of African spirituality is what I call spiritual communion. This is what anthropologists and some historians refer to as spirit possession. And I want to remove that from your vocabulary if it's there. No, spiritual forces don't possess and take over your body like the exorcists and our demons. That belongs to a different cultural and political worldview. Here in African spirituality, spiritual communion refers to the interface between essentially our human bodies that act as hosts to those spiritual forces that come into those bodies and share that space. So think of it as a guest invited over into your home. And that while the guest is there, they may share information with you that is important for your and your family's benefit. And then they leave. And so spiritual communion is that unity between energy and matter, is that unification or that interplay between energy and matter that is as natural as you and I breathing. Another feature of African spiritualities are certainly use of medicines, plant-based medicines, again, tapped from nature. So both the materials from nature, like plant medicine used for healing and therapeutics, but also spiritual forces that animate those plants and those other physical features are notable and common features of African spirituality. African spirituality is indeed simple, and hopefully I've communicated that simplicity to you without taking away its substance or its broader meanings. African spirituality is like water. It takes on different forms and shapes, but it still is that elemental force like water. And those shapes and form, of course, are material or physical, ideational or liquid, or spiritual or gaseous. But it's all the same water in whatever you find it. African spirituality is a tool, like other tools we've shared in other episodes, to be used to grasp our ancestry, because we human beings are not simply just matter and mind. We are body, mind, and spirit. And spirituality is perhaps the most important facet of our being, and therefore we have to have a way to both approach, understand, and work with that spirituality. So, hopefully in this episode I've made African spirituality simple and attainable and of course approachable. And if I've done that, then I've done my job. For Powered by Ancestry, I am Kwesi Kunadu. I've been your guide, and I'll see you next time.